Well, it's a great pleasure to be here. I hope you expected English. Vamos a hacer esto en inglés, ¿vale? Okay. Thank you to B-Way for inviting me here. I have to admit, I almost didn't make it here. I got in a taxi in downtown Madrid at IE Business School to come here. And when the taxi went off, and the driver asked me, which way would you like to go? As a behavioral science person, I said, well, what are my choices? And he said, well, you can go the short way, which is less expensive. You can go the long way, which is actually faster, or you can go the scenic way. And at that moment, I felt the weight of the paradox of choice. And you all know what happens when we face the paradox of choice, right? What do? I deferred my choice. I got out of the taxi. I said, no, thank you, I'm going to walk. So I walked 6 kilometers from Madrid, and here I am, a little sweaty, but I made it. And it is my great pleasure to introduce our distinguished guest, Cass Sunstein. So he is a professor of law at Harvard. He is a former director of the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs in the United States. He's one of the top minds in behavioral science and law, recognized for his prolific and cited contributions in academia in U.S. law. Now, of course, we here today, we know him principally for his book, Nudge, which he wrote with Nobel laureate Richard Thaler, which revolutionized literally the thinking about behavioral interventions in public policy. He's written other books, more recently Noise with Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman and Olivier Sibony. He has a book called Rumors, which is about misinformation that you might want to read. And you probably don't know, but he's also written a book called The World According to Star Wars, which is now on the top of my reading list because I love Star Wars. So Cass, so let's check the sound. Can you hear me?
I can hear you just great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure to have you. We have a room filled with people, at least 10,000. I know you can't see us, but we can see you. No pressure. So let me kick this off with some questions about successes related to behavioral economics and nudging. We've seen how governments, how companies, how organizations of different types have tried to apply these concepts. And what I wanted to start off with was maybe you could share with us some examples of success, maybe surprising ones if you can think of any that are maybe counterintuitive, and give us a sense for why they were successful. The floor is yours.
Thank you for that. So case one, poor children in the United States are entitled to free school meals, breakfast and lunch free if you're poor, and a number of the families don't get what they're legally entitled to. And the initiative was to enroll them automatically in free school meals. It's called direct certification. And as a result of that, tens of millions of children, over 10 million children, are enjoying free school meals. That's a spectacular success from behaviorally informed policy. A second example comes from Washington, D.C. I'm speaking from Washington, D.C. right now, where there's a technology which really improves outcomes for children. This isn't about food, this is about education, and a lot of parents don't use the technology. The nudge was to make it basically very simple and easy for parents to do that, and as a result, the percentage of people who were using the technology that helps children increased from 1% to over 90%, from 1% to over 90%. And the results are the kids are having better educational experiences as a result of that. I'd say a third idea comes from Europe, and it involves helping people to benefit from green energy. And in Germany and in Switzerland, one initiative is to say that you're going to be green by default, that your family or your business, you're going to use green energy unless you don't want to. And the results from Germany and Switzerland, there's also a similar set of results from California, is that the percentage of people who use green energy increases very dramatically. And that's terrific for environmental issues, regular air pollution or climate. It can also be very good economically. In any case, the impact of that nudge is very, very high.
And so besides us, you mentioned the free meals plan, which worked incredibly well. So besides us in companies thinking about offering all of our employees free meals, what what kinds of things, how can we think about applying some of these ideas in the context of, let's say, managing people, nudging employees, or maybe customers? Any thoughts on that?
Yes. So let's talk about customers. Amazon has something called one-click purchases. You just click like that. And as a result of that, it's really easy for people to buy things. And that's part of the secret of Amazon's success. They make it really easy for people to buy things. If you want employees, for example, to enjoy their jobs better or maybe to do better, here's a little idea. A lot of companies are doing this. Have a sludge audit. Sludge audit. There should be a version of this in every language so that when people hear sludge audit, they know exactly what's meant. Sludge consists of administrative burdens, waiting time, time spent on the phone, forms you have to fill out that are very long and confusing. For many employees, sludge is a curse. It's not technically a violation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but for human beings, it is a curse. It makes being an employee harder and less fun. For companies to do a 2-week sludge audit and see what are employees doing that involves administrative burdens that are maybe a waste of time or dreary, and they're not doing what they are employed to do, which is to help grow the business. Do a sludge audit, make it informal for 2 weeks. You'll find there's more sludge in all likelihood than anyone wanted. And then the sludge audit can be followed by a behaviorally informed sludge reduction strategy, which will make 2025 better, happier, and more profitable.
And just for those of us, I mean, we're in a multilingual environment here, so sludge is bureaucracy, essentially. It might be a foreign term here because we don't have bureaucracy in Spain, but you're in the United States, so there's some there at least, right? So,
what if I might, let me say a little bit about sludge. It is an unfamiliar term. Bureaucracy isn't quite the right definition, if I may say. Think of it as frictions or administrative burdens or waiting times, little barriers or burdens that prevent people from doing their job. It might be a 12-page form. It might be a 6-day waiting period. It might be a requirement that you go somewhere rather than you file online. It might be paper rather than electronic. So think of sludge as administrative burdens of multiple kinds, and every country in the world, emphatically including Spain, has a lot of them. Customers face sludge, investors face sludge, and employees face sludge. And once we have the category in mind, we have a new frontier of behavioral science. The OECD is going big on sludge audits and sludge reduction. They have something called an International Sludge Academy. And nations that speak the Romance languages, I say they are the world's first and best hope for sludge reduction.
So, and I guess for those of us who work in customer experience design or UX, I mean, we could think about, in some ways, I think, but you tell me if this is correct, the idea of when we map out a customer or an employee journey, and we're looking for pain points that we're trying to smooth out, those can be sludge moments, the places where there's sludge that could be reduced. Is that fair to say?
Completely fair to say.
Just to map it to a more corporate language.
Customer experience initiatives that are informed by behavioral science keep in mind kind of behavioral finding number one, which is if things aren't going well, make it easy. Make it easy.
Fantastic. So how many people are doing actually behavioral economics, some nudging, these kinds of things in your companies? Raise your hand, or your organizations here. Okay, so Cass, I've got a lot of people with their hands up. So for everyone's benefit, I mean, we try to use these techniques, these tools, these concepts. When you think about examples of success, are there secret ingredients, the secret sauce, so to speak, that you could share with us that might help the audience think about the kinds of things they need to think about to make their intervention successful?
Completely. So in companies, often making something automatic or the default is a highly successful strategy. So if you make it so that automatically people get a certain benefit or a certain obligation even, unless they don't want it and they have to opt out, the shift from opt-in to opt-out has a big impact. That's number one. Number two is to make things that are a little bit hard a little bit easier. So simplification of a task, simplification of access to something, simplification of entry into something that an employer wants employees to do or that a company wants customers to do. Just make it simpler, and then that'll be a lot better. There's a large company, I'm not going to mention its name, a large international company that's used behavioral science for its own goals, which include both economic growth and public health. And it's found automaticity and simplification to be magically successful in transforming the company in the direction that's sought. A third thing to do is to use information in a way that's simple and consists of reminders. So reminders are a little bit of the overlooked behavioral strategy. And the reason reminders, it seems so simple, work is they overcome a few problems that human beings face just because we're human. One is limited attention. A reminder overcomes limited attention. And another is unrealistic optimism, where people suffer or benefit from unrealistic optimism. A reminder which says you haven't done this yet, you maybe want to do this now. A reminder which says this task is due Friday, maybe you should get started on it now. That can pay big dividends. And the reason reminders are so good is not only they're effective, but they're very inexpensive.
Great. Well, thank you for that. Now, let me flip this a little bit. So you mentioned, we talked a little bit about successes. You and Thaler wrote this book. Kahneman's work got popularized at this point, maybe 15 more years ago. Kicked off a big wave. You almost might say there was a bit of hype. And we know that there's been some failures. Part of the, let's say, the effect of kicking this off was you have the UK government and Cameron kicking off a unit. Obama administration had a social and behavior science team, right? But there are stories of failures, and I'm wondering if you could share with us maybe what would for you the most notable failures that we might learn the most from understanding.
Okay, so here's my favorite failures. I think failures are successes, by the way, because then you know more. You know what doesn't work. My favorite is that there was an academic article a number of years ago that said if people sign a form at the beginning rather than at the end, they're more likely to be truthful. So if you're filing a form, let's say, for taxes and you sign at the beginning, then you're less likely to cheat. And this has very broad implications. It seems like a very simple nudge. Just have people sign early rather than at the end. There was data actually from the UK I learned about that suggested this didn't work. They tried it, it failed, didn't work at all. And I actually was interested when I worked in the US government in engaging with some of my colleagues in government of using this. And people were reluctant because they weren't sure the data was good, and they were completely right. That was a failure. It's intuitive that it would work. The data it's not clear what the original data's problem was. It may have been actually fraud, but in any case, it was bad data, and that's an instructive failure.
So in this case, is it fair to say that there was some research, potentially not great research, suggesting that this might work, and then it got put into application in the real world and failed, didn't work? So what's the takeaway there? That maybe doing small tests based on ideas and checking them first before you roll out larger interventions?
Exactly. So there are some nudges that have a massive effect. Typically, shifting from opt-in to opt-out has a big effect. In one analysis, it increases participation on average by 26%. That's really good. If you give people information, or if you change the architecture of a situation in some way that seems promising, intuition suggests it's promising, test it, pilot it, and see if it works. So I'll tell you a story. I worked with people from Silicon Valley on some of this stuff, and I talked to them about cost-benefit analysis and its importance, and they said, we don't do cost-benefit analysis. And I almost fainted. I was amazed. You don't do cost-benefit analysis in Silicon Valley? How can you not do cost-benefit analysis? And they said, we can't. We don't know the costs and benefits. So I asked, what do you do? How do you, market things? And they said, oh, it's simple. We test. We test. And that testing, it can be, if you don't have the data that you're clear on, you're hopeful, then you have a little test. Sludge reduction, by the way, taking away administrative burdens and making things easy is almost certainly going to work. The magnitude of the effect we don't know. The likelihood of the effect is very, very high.
And so use the example of the signatures, before versus after on the forms. Any other examples that you can think of that you might share regarding failures?
Yeah, I should say that the promise of behaviorally informed strategies is on a scale of 1 to 10, approximately 380, meaning it's off the charts. So to emphasize the failures is extremely important, but what's been achieved in the last 10 years goes so far beyond anything Thaler and I imagined. The creativity of the private sector has been inspiring and awesome. Here's an example of a failure. If you give people information about calories on food, it's not clear you're going to have a big impact on caloric consumption. Now, it might be that companies will offer lower calorie meals. So it seems that companies are responsive to a calorie labeling, but there's some data that's very ambiguous about how responsive customers are. And there are a number of reasons for that. One might be that people in the relevant populations, they really like brownies. I like brownies. They like cake. I like cake. And they like things that have high calorie. And they see their high calories and they say, okay, that's not good, but please, I want the brownies. So that's an instructive, I wouldn't quite say failure, but it's not a success.
So, okay, so you mentioned the 320%. There's been some huge successes, particularly in the private sector and the public sector as well. For people who are thinking about doing these things and are doing them, let's do kind of maybe like a pre-mortem in the sense of what are your ideas for the kinds of things that you think companies should do more of or less of to make these things work and to avoid failures? What should we be thinking about?
Okay, so in my own engagement with governments and with the private sector, it's problem-driven rather than theory-driven. So the question is, what's the problem? If the problem is, for example, that you want employees to take up the use of generative AI, or you want people to use new technologies that they're reluctant to use, one strategy is to make it easy and simple for them to do that. Another is to have what is described to them as an experiment, try it for a couple of weeks. My guess is if they try it for a couple of weeks, then they're going to try it for a lot of weeks. Or is the problem that you want to move offerings from, let's say, one kind to another, and you're not sure your customers are going to like it? Then we can use a repertoire of strategies, one which involves information disclosure, where information is given about why you should like the product. It's really good. It's better for the task at hand. Another possibility is to use social norms to suggest that people are increasingly choosing this product or really liking it. That's why we're doing it. If you're trying to move products, if you're trying to get employees to be more productive, then something Thaler and I have thought a lot about, and this is in the new edition of Nudge, it wasn't in the original, is to make something fun. So if there's a way to make something fun that was previously dreary, that can be extremely effective. So I think a new frontier for behavioral science is emphasizing not cognition, but instead affect, that is people's emotional disposition to thing. And you can't make a jury task fun just by using the word fun, but a smile or a sense of a hopeful future that can at least verge in the direction of fun. So I have a little framework. It's called the FEAST framework. And it says, if you want behavior change, F is for fun, E is for easy, A is for attractive, S is for social, meaning use the social norm, and T is for timely. And each of those letters has decades of research behind it. So we need to identify what the problem is. And then there's a repertoire of behaviorally informed tools, some of which may not be applicable to the problem at hand, but some of which will be.
Thank you for that. Let me change gears just a little bit because you mentioned brownies. And in my taxi on the way over here, or actually in my walk on the way over here, I burned a lot of calories. And I was thinking about how much I like sugary sodas that are filled with really bad for me ingredients. And I love French fries. And I want my sodas this big, and I want my French fries on plates this big. And there are places in the world that are contemplating taking that away from me, making companies reduce portion sizes and saying, Lee, you can't have your big fries and your bad for you soda. So that I think makes contact with a big area of your work with is the ethics of nudging. And you're a law professor, so we're glad that you're thinking about ethics and nudging. Thank you for that. So share with us a little bit, what are your biggest concerns with respect to ethics in the context of behavioral economics and nudging?
So I've done surveys in, I think, 17 nations, I believe including Spain. It's a large number on what people think about nudges and behaviorally informed strategies. So I can describe my own ethical concerns, but I feel more taken with the ethical concerns expressed by the world's populations. And what's notable is that across diverse countries, Germany and France and Canada and Mexico and China and Hungary, what stands out is people tend to agree across various countries. And here are things that are ethical kind of precepts that seem built in almost to our species. If a nudge is in the interest of people who are being nudged, and if it's consistent with their values, they tend to like it. So if they think this is something that promotes my well-being and is consistent with my values, that's great. If there's a nudge that is compromising my values, maybe my religious values, maybe my political values, people won't like that very much. If they say it's consistent with my values, but it's not promoting my interests, for example, suppose it's something that's sacrificing my money or my health, I don't like that at all. So number one, the ethical requirement from Kant, German Immanuel Kant, that's on the value side and interests. You can say the English philosopher, Jeremy Bentham, people really care about that. People also don't like being manipulated. So if people are subject to something which seems sneaky or covert or tricky, then even if the ultimate goal is good, they start to get nervous. So transparency is very, very important. Respect for people's agency by saying, for example, you're going to be automatically enrolled in a savings plan. Here's why. If you don't want to be, you don't have to be. You can opt out. People say, okay, I get that. That's transparent and it respects my agency. It's also kind of in my interests. People don't want their property to be taken without their consent. That seems very broadly felt. So if people think something's being taken from them and they haven't fully consented, then they're going to get mad. If something offends something like, let's call it an intuitive sense of what their rights are, they're not going to like that at all. So if people are automatically deemed members of a certain political party or automatically deemed members of a certain religious community, subject to opt-out, they think, no. That's not good. That I get to decide. And there may be some cultural disagreements. We actually find in Hungary and Japan somewhat lower levels of enthusiasm for nudges than in other countries, a little mysterious. Very high level of enthusiasm in South Korea and China. But these are differences which are within the family differences, not huge differences. So values, interests, no rights violations, and yes, transparency, no covertness, no sneaking.
And how does that, so if we go back to my desire for giant sodas and big plates of French fries that some people want to take away from me, so I'm upset about that based on many of those criteria that you mentioned. So this, I think, connects with your idea of libertarian paternalism, right? So I guess my questions are, maybe tell us just a little bit about that, and my questions are kind of, somebody wants me to do the right thing, but whose definition of right? I mean, is it better for me or is it better for society? What does better mean in these contexts of guiding behavior? And how does libertarian paternalism come to bear on all of this?
Okay, great. So a GPS device is an example of libertarian paternalism. So your GPS device allows you to say, I want to go to Madrid, I don't want to go to Berlin. You get to choose the destination. And if it tells you, here's how you get to Madrid, and you think, I don't like that route, I want the faster route or the more scenic route, then you can override it. So libertarian paternalism means that you're ultimately in charge of the destination and that you get to reject the nudge if it suggests a route that you don't like. It's paternalistic, though, the GPS is, in the sense that it tells you how it thinks you should go if you want to get to your preferred destination. And if you look at nudges, they are typically forms of libertarian paternalism. The laptop that I'm using right now has libertarian paternalism in it. It has default settings of multiple kinds. It gives me information. If I do certain things, it will tell me, are you sure you want to? Delete this file or send this email. It has a lot of things that allow me ultimately to be free, but that are paternalistic toward me. Companies are often engaged in libertarian paternalism with their employees, also with their customers. They will steer them in a certain way, but it's ultimately the customer or the employee that's in charge across a wide terrain. Now, a lot of libertarian paternalism is about protecting the chooser. So a GPS device protects me from getting lost or spending excessive time on the road. And that's good because the ultimate criterion, does it make me better off as judged by myself? So for Dick Thaler and me, the ultimate criterion for things that are affecting individual choosers is, does it make them better off as they themselves judge it? And that's our test. And that can be applied to things involving food, things involving money, things involving health. Doctors engage in libertarian paternalism often. They say, this is what you want to do if you want to handle your heart problem or your struggle with depression, let's say. But ultimately, it's up to you. Now, as you say, there are some nudges and some behaviorally informed interventions that aren't about protecting choosers. They're about protecting people who are affected by choosers. And there might be an argument for a mandate. No one has a right to punch someone else in the nose or to stick toxic substances in their home. So maybe there you don't want freedom-preserving interventions. You might want to say you just can't do that. But there's a place for nudges there too. So in Switzerland and Germany, the automatic enrollment in green energy, that is designed to protect everyone, society, from pollution. And it does preserve liberty, but the hope is that people won't opt out of the thing that improves public health.
I have a million questions I would love to ask you, but we are running out of time. So let me close with one last question. I think a little bit of a fun one I'd like to have answered, which is, I'm wondering, will there be a day when we've been nudged so much that we see it coming a kilometer or a mile away, and we say, oh no, they're trying to nudge me? Or are humans just innately so gullible that this is always going to work, and we'll always be kind of out-nudged by the nudgers?
I think we have to think of it a little differently. If my car tells me you're about to hit something very hard, which is going to smash your car, so it goes beep, beep, beep. Or if I'm switching lanes and there's a car in the lane and it starts emitting a noise which says be careful, I don't think, oh, I'm being nudged, that's sad, I wish I weren't. I think thank you. So if we see something that says, if you want to be healthy, you probably shouldn't eat this, but you can, then that should be welcomed, not despised. So I'm thinking of my laptop right now because I'm looking into it. It's nudging me in a whole bunch of ways. And I'm not thinking, go away, nudge. I'm thinking, thank you for preventing me from, doing something really silly involving, let's say, deleting a file that I kind of need.
And I'm guessing you're probably getting a nudge from your calendar saying, you need to go to the next meeting.
Well, this has been a great pleasure.
Thank you so much. So please let's have a big round of applause for Cass Sunstein. It's been a pleasure to have you, and we look forward to your next book.
Great. Thanks all.
Thanks so
Hope
much.
to see you in person someday. Thanks.